Alright, how's it going, y'all? So today, I got a great suggestion for a tutorial, what mobile apps to use with Synology, because there are quite frankly a ton of them, and we're going to be going over all of that in this video. So we're going to be starting with basically which apps do I actually use, and as well as which ones are dead, and then just going over what the purpose-built apps are, because there's a lot of apps that Synology publishes on app stores that I don't necessarily use all the time or recommend people use, but they're still really good for specific use cases, like the mail app. If you are running mail server on the NAS, it can be quite useful rather than trying to use the built-in client, though most people end up just using the built-in client. And we're going to be going over all of that in this video. So I'm going to be doing this on iOS apps, but they have Android counterparts for pretty much everything. And I think everything I mentioned in this video will have a fully working Android counterpart. And let's just start off by looking through the massive list of apps that Synology has. And so right off the bat, you see when I just search Synology in the App Store, you actually get a lot of people who aren't actually Synology apps, so watch out for those. We're only going to be looking at Synology apps, and then at the end, some apps I use with my Synology that are not necessarily Synology apps. And so we're just going to look at Synology, and we're going to look through their latest releases. Basically all the apps that they have released, and I'm going to be skipping over the B stuff as well as the C2 stuff, so it's not really specifically Synology DSM. The B stuff is pretty close. We're going to start all the way at the beginning by publish date, and you can see back in the day, everything used to be called DS blank. And so most of these apps I don't use very often. The two that are still kind of around and still quite useful, DS File and DS Cam. I'm going to be talking about both of those later on. But a lot of the DS ones are honestly just a lot older of apps. And while a lot of the older DS apps do work, they are older and you definitely feel it, but the functionality is still there. There are a few of these apps that I'm going to start off right off the bat and talk about that are just no longer in existence and you probably should not be using. DS Photo was replaced actually twice. First by Photos Mobile up here, or sorry, Synology Moments, and then by Synology Photos, which we'll talk about later. Then the other one that is gone is DS Cloud, and now as of about 6 months ago, DS Video are all basically no longer used, as DS Cloud was back the predecessor to Synology Drive, and DS Video has been killed entirely. And with that, that'll cover all the apps that are just no longer used and really have no reason to be in existence. The one thing you might still be using is DS Video. They've not removed it from the App Store or anything. And essentially, whenever you remove out Video Station from your NAS, DS Video will obviously no longer work. Okay, so those are all the apps Synology has ever published. At least the ones that are still on App Stores. I don't know of any other ones. Now let's go into ones that I actually use and or recommend people use for various use cases. And I've got a nice little setup here. The first one is for files. There are really two different ways to use files. Both Synology Drive and DS File are both still maintained and still used, and they are really useful depending on what you're doing on your NAS. So Synology Drive is a companion app to Synology Drive on the NAS, whereas DS File does not require any other apps installed on the NAS itself. So DS File, if you look at it, is very basic. You simply just log into your NAS. You can do a basic photo backup, have offline files, and then from there, it's really just like files on the actual web interface of DSM. Go through, you can look at everything. It's even got now ads for Synology Drive, but it allows you to see everything. And the reason that this is so useful is it is able to do a few things that Synology Drive is not. Namely, one, view the snapshot folder. So if you use DS File, you're able to recover snapshots directly from your mobile device. And that is really useful, especially if you're working on something that has tons and tons and tons of files, and therefore you can't necessarily use Synology Drive's versions for it, because Synology Drive's versions can quickly get out of control if you've got over 100,000 plus files. I don't recommend adding versioning to Synology Drive. Really, about 10,000 to 50,000 is where I try to draw that line, especially because snapshots do not have any issue with number of files. Snapshots don't care if there are 5 files or 5 million files because of the way they work. So that's reason number one that DS file is awesome. You can actually just go in and browse snapshots the exact same way you can on Windows File Explorer, Mac OS Finder, or the Files app on Synology. So that is one reason to use it. And then the other is it does not require having Synology Drive running. So Synology Drive is great, but enabling a bunch of folders in the Synology Drive admin console, especially if you've got tons and tons and tons of files, it can add a lot of performance overhead to your NAS and just overall slow down your NAS compared to not having it at all. Because when you've got just basic files and you don't have Synology Drive indexing them, then there's very low overhead to it. But indexing files, which is required to use Synology Drive, takes a lot because now Synology Drive has to have a database of all the files and their versions and everything like that. That does take up performance on the NAS, and you especially see it on NASs that have tons and tons and tons of files, like over 1 million files, especially like photographers and things like that. If you can get away with not using Synology Drive, then you will get better performance out of your NAS. So I rarely enable Synology Drive for video editors unless they need it. So it's great for syncing and things like that, but if you don't need it, you can get substantially better performance. And you don't need any of that indexing to use DS file. So that's reason number two to use it. It allows you to see everything on your NAS, regardless of whether or not it's enabled in Synology Drive team folders. And then finally, thing number three that you can do with this that you can't do on Synology Drive is view the homes folder. So right here, we can come in and just like we can in our admin console on DSM, we can come in and grab files out of users' home folders, which for workflows that need that, this is very useful. So while DS file does have a fairly old kind of clunky looking interface, it still works well, and it's absolutely something I would recommend installing if you just need random access to your files, because it gives you that without having to do any additional settings on the NAS, and you don't have to worry about adding in any performance overhead to the NAS. All right, so that was DS file. Let's talk about its flashy older brother, Synology Drive. So as I said, Synology Drive requires you to have Synology Drive indexing installed, and that's why we don't see all of my folders here in team folders. You only see things that have been enabled in Synology Drive admin console and indexed. But you can see right off the bat, it is very nice, pretty interface. They've got this view right here that is kind of set up to be like your recent files and things like that. And it confuses a lot of people. So the home section, I think, is useful once you've been using it for a while. But right off the bat, I have a lot of people say, hey, I can't see any of my files, when really you want to go into your files, and then things are set up into one of three sections. Your My Drive, which is your home folder. Basically, these are all the files in the home folder of whoever's logged in, the My Drive section of Synology Drive. Then any team folders that you've got permission to and are also enabled as Synology Drive team folders. And finally, computer backups. So if you use Synology Drive to back up a computer, there is a nice and easy interface to viewing those files and just directly shows you them. So this tends to be where I send people to start, just because I think a file structure is a lot easier to understand than a recent, and this filtering option. It's useful once you've been around for a while, but until you're actually using it a bunch, start with your files and go through there. And through here, you can do all the file operations you'd expect to be able to do. Folders, upload files, delete things, edit things, everything you would expect to be able to do, as well as download files for offline use. Synology Drive does also have an option to actually back up your photos. So if you do not want to use Synology Photos for whatever reason, but still want to back up your phone images, you can use the photo backup directly here and get a lot of the exact same options as you do when you're using Photos Mobile or Synology Photos, which I'm going to be talking about next. And there's also the ability to sync files and basically always have them on your phone. So let's say you travel a lot and you want to make sure that even if you don't have Wi-Fi or internet, you still have access to specific files. And you can just come in here and enable a sync task. And just like Synology Drive on the desktop app, you just say what folders you would like to sync and how you'd like it to be done. There's actually a lot more settings here, and you can say only sync when you're on Wi-Fi or only when charging, as well as only add specific files. So if you need specific things, this can be really useful, and you can just edit documents, and whenever you're back on the internet and connected back in, they just update. Finally, the last really useful thing you can do with the Synology Drive app is share files out with people, just like you do with your other connection. So I can just come in here and share any given folder by hitting these three dots, hitting share, creating either a QR code or a public link that anybody can access, and then sending these off to people. So it's the exact same way that this works if you create a share link in Synology Drive on the computer or on the web browser. And you can go ahead and share it, copy people, and then it will show up in this shared with others. Synology Drive is really useful for teams who are heavily trying to get off of Google Drive and have that very familiar interface, as you might have seen. This looks, and they really tried to get a very similar workflow to Google Drive in general. All right, so that was Synology Drive. Really useful if you're already using Synology Drive on the computer, and it can make it very easy to just have a lot of people manage their own files and really get that kind of Google Drive feel or Dropbox feel. The third and final app that I really install on a ton of people's devices is going to be Photos Mobile. Photos Mobile is a very well polished application, and it works great. If you use Synology Photos, it is an incredibly easy way to view all of your files, and you can back up your phone photos directly from it, and I think they really nailed this app. Now, with the new DSM 7.2 update, you actually have this where it generates your previews for like HEIC images, and so it's really important to install if you are uploading HEIC images outside of actually on the app. The app just does it automatically anyway. But there's a ton of capability in here, and I think it works really nicely. You've got the ability to just sort by various setups here. So you can go through and just see your folder view or your year, month, day. Then we can come in and you've got your albums, your sharing, and everything directly in Synology Photos. So everything that Synology Photos can do, you can essentially do on the app right here. And I think it just works really well. I've spent a ton of time showing this in other videos. You can set up your backup tasks. There's a whole lot of stuff you can do. And this is the app that I use a ton. My whole family has it installed on their computers because it just gives everybody really easy access to all of the photos on the NAS. And they can back up their own phone images and everything like that. I think it's a really well written app, and it's a no-brainer if you have photos and you want to be using your NAS for storing personal family photos or videos. You can do the exact same sharing, creating photo requests, and everything like that, as well as setting up that mobile backup. I'm not going to touch this because this is my phone and I don't want to break my mobile backup. And I cover this app much more in depth in my Synology Photos guide that I'll leave a link down in the description below too. So those are really the big three apps to definitely check out. Synology Drive or DS File, depending on if you're using Synology Drive heavily or not. And finally, Photos Mobile for everybody who wants that really nice and easy user interface for their phone images or even just DSLR images. I cannot recommend Photos Mobile enough. One note, it's odd, on the App Store it's called Synology Photos, and then when it downloads it's called Photos Mobile. Trips some people up, but that is the app. So those are all the kind of daily use, let's get files on and off the NAS. Now let's talk about a couple of other apps that I use quite often depending on everything. First off is Secure SignIn, and this is all going to be blurred because this is where I have my 2FA code for 1.5 zillion NASs for various people who I manage their NASs for. So that is what that is. You can either use the 2FA, which is the OTP, or the actual approved to sign in. I tend to recommend using the OTP just because honestly, it's easier in my opinion, funny enough. It's just really easy to add. So Secure SignIn makes it very easy to add in two-factor authentication into your NAS. There's tons of options there, really easy to use, and especially if your NAS is exposed to internet, especially with direct port forwarding, would highly recommend having either two-factor authentication or DSM 7.2's multi-factor authentication, at least one of those two. Next up is going to be Active Insight. And Active Insight is really useful if you're managing a whole lot of NASs, and they've got this full-blown cloud monitoring solution that allows you to get notifications for all the different NASs. Lets you see what backups have happened, lets you see everything, disk I/O. And it's really useful and puts everything in one place. For companies who deploy tons and tons of Synology NASs, Active Insight can be really useful. And it also comes with 3 free licenses for people who just want to use it at home to make sure they get notifications and nice history of everything. I personally use Zabbix instead, but Active Insight is still really great, and the app is very well written. If you look through everything, you see all of the different events. You can see, okay, what's my CPU usage for the past X, Y, and Z time? And it just gives you it all in a really nice, easy to look at table that I think can be really useful for people who need to monitor this stuff. There is a subscription fee associated with it. If you have more than 3 NASs you want to monitor, I think it's like $20 a year. I personally just use Zabbix for all of this because I've got a full monitoring solution that I need to use instead that doesn't just monitor Synologies. But if you're looking to just monitor Synologies, it's really nice. And it's set up where a team can use it, where people can resolve various events. And it's just got a very nice, clean interface. This is one of their new generation apps that actually looks like a very nice, pretty app. So Active Insight is great for monitoring anything you need to on your NASs, and they've also got the web client as well. All right, so now the next app that I actually do use somewhat is going to be DS Finder. It's not something I've used in a long time, but in a pinch, it can be useful. DS Finder is a very janky, minimal interface for your NAS. Basically, it's a few of the settings of Control Panel directly on an app. So you've got the ability to see how much storage you're using, log in, basic user management here, where, I mean, if you, in a pinch, you need to reset somebody's password on the road, this is the best way of doing it. It's not a great interface, and you can't do much else other than change people's groups. But especially in a pinch, if you get a call that somebody's password is compromised, you can change it on here. It'll also tell you the basic system info and just really simple stuff that maybe is useful for you. So another use case is, say you're managing this, and you want to be able to unblock an IP address from your phone, you can do that. It also then links you to DSM Mobile, which is their very janky web interface. If you've ever tried to log into the web interface of your NAS on a mobile browser, that has very limited features. You can see, funny enough, it still has DS Video listed out here, even though they've killed off that app. So it's still not the best, but once again, if you need to update stuff, technically you can do it right here. And there's some stuff that you can go through and add in, but it's all very limited. Then most of the time what you'll end up doing is hitting here, going to desktop mode, and then trying to figure out how to go through all these settings to actually do anything that you actually need to get done. But hey, in a pinch, I've been here and I've done it because I've had to. So that now leads us to our final app that I think is going to get a refresh, or should get a refresh at some point, DS Cam. I don't have any cams listed on here anymore, as I no longer use Surveillance Station. I now use Unify Protect. But DS Cam is a old but working interface for Synology Surveillance Station. So if you use Surveillance Station as your NVR, and you've got a bunch of security cameras recording to the NAS, you can actually use DS Cam to view all those cameras live, right on your phone, download footage, click through all the cameras, everything like that. And it works. It's nothing flashy, but it'll do exactly what you need to get done. All right, so now those are the 7 apps that I actually use somewhat frequently or deploy on client systems, depending on everything. I want to talk about some of the other apps that are still used. I just don't have a lot of people using them, but they still work fine. DS Audio, if you use Audio Station on the NAS, it allows you to stream your songs, and I believe also download them. And I've got people who use it and love it. DS Note, if you're using Synology Notes, which I'm really hoping gets an overhaul in DS 8, but we'll see, then it allows you to view all your notes that are used in Synology Note Station. DS router is for SRM, so we're not going to talk about it here. Mail Plus is for using Synology Mail Plus if you've got everybody on there. Though once again, I would bet you're probably going to be downloading and just using the built-in iOS or Android mail client. Synology Chat, another thing that I really hope gets an overhaul if you're using chat. Synology VPN Plus, that is for people who are using SRM VPN Plus. So that's the Synology routers. Not how a lot of people are using it. One of the funnier apps out there, Synology Live Cam. This allows you to use your smartphone as a security camera. I guess if you really need something to use your old phone for, it might be useful, but honestly, it's probably not worth it for most people. And that brings us to the end of the list. C2 password and all the B stuff is for another video. So those are all of the first-party apps. Now I want to talk about 4 honorable mentions for third-party apps that I regularly use, and it was originally 3 and then I completely forgot about Plex. So first off is actually the built-in Files app. So for iOS users, and I believe it's the same for Android users, if you use DS File or Drive, you can actually just get all your files loaded in the native File Explorer app, so you don't have to mess around with the clunky apps, especially if you're using DS File, and it works totally fine. Now you get the exact native interface and you can open everything exactly as you expect to be able to, just directly through there. So it's definitely something to check out, and you can actually connect, at least on iOS, directly to an SMB server if you need to. Finally, 2 options for VPN access that I use. So I primarily use OpenVPN. It just allows me to connect to a lot of different client systems, and it's fully self-hosted, so I'm not paying any license fees on that at all. And the other option is Tailscale. So these are honorable mention apps. I use them all the time for various things. What they allow you to do is just remote back into the network of the NAS through a secure encrypted tunnel. And so that way you don't have to do any kind of port forwarding to access everything at full speed. And I've got videos that cover both of them. And all these apps do is just allow you to access that VPN. And finally, the last that I actually forgot until recently was Plex. Plex is probably the easiest to recommend successor to VideoStation. It is not open source, so there is a company who does own it and controls all of it, and that is tough. So if you really want to go open source, there's MB and Jellyfin, but Plex has the best first-party apps for iOS, Android, TVs, all in one centralized location that are all really the same app across all of them, which is a really hard thing to get when you've got an open source project, and now a bunch of people have built various apps for various things. And so Plex, if you're running Plex, has a great mobile app. Okay, that is all of our mobile apps to use with Synologies. There's a lot of really good ones, and there's a lot of really bad ones. And for some reason, there's ones that are really, really, really old that have never been removed out of the App Store that have been replaced 3 times already. And the fact that there's so many dead apps still on the profile that you can still download, which is good. But it does mean that it's hard for new users to understand which apps to download, so I hope this video was helpful. Well, that's it. If you have any other questions, put those down in the comments below. And if you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. And have a good one. Bye.